Welcome to this week's In Conversation With. My name's Hayley, and I'm one of the regional ministers here at the South Wales Baptist Association. And over the coming months, we're going to be having conversations with ministers from around our association and also people within our wider Baptist family that are seeing God move and are doing mission in different and exciting ways. And so today, I'm joined by Ruth Rice, who is part of the Renew Wellbeing network. Ruth, do you want to spend some time just explaining who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, so I'm Ruth Rice. I'm Director of Renew Wellbeing, which is a little charity based, well, it's national, but based in Nottingham. So I used to lead a Baptist church a few years ago, and it was kind of on the back of having had a breakdown myself, and then I began to think about how hard that was to be part of church and actually to negotiate what it looked like to have a faith and to have fallen apart in your head a bit and how actually it brought a whole new level of challenge. But at the same time, I'd come across some really amazing kind of rhythms and habits of prayer and contemplation that I'd found, as a charismatic Baptist, I'd found really helpful. So we set up 5 years ago this little space in Nottingham. It's like a cafe-style space where it's okay not to be okay, where anybody could come, bring a hobby, share a hobby. There was no them and us. There was no, oh, you're the mentally ill people and we're the church, because we were all in the same boat. And we just kind of shared stuff from furniture restoration to crochet to doing a crossword, things that we found did us good in our well-being. And then half of the space was a prayer space. So any faith and none, no proselytizing in the cafe area, but you're welcome to join us in our rhythms and habits of prayer. They're not hidden, they're not in another space, they're not a churchy thing, they're what we do for our well-being. And so we prayed in a way that anybody could join in. So psalm in the morning, but we took it really simply, line at a time. Lord's Prayer at lunchtime, examine, rewind the day at the end of the day. So we started 5 years ago, 4 days a week. We opened, it's a bit crackers that, but it's still open 5 years later, 4 days a week in a little kind of cafe style space on the high street. And about 2.5 years ago, I realised other churches were asking, well, hang on, how do you do this? And we come up with be present, be prayerful, work in partnership with mental health services, so sort of 3 Ps. And so we started teaching other churches to do that. And by the time the doors closed on all of them, for a month ago, there were 53 cafes nationally, which is really exciting to see different churches doing it in slightly different ways, but all putting prayer at the heart, putting presence as a key thing, and then partnering with mental health services. So that, yeah, and now we're all sitting in rooms on Zoom, which we're not loving.
So how have you adjusted then to have a space online where it's okay to not be okay?
Yeah, we've tried. I mean, it's not ideal, is it? I've been really sad about it, to be honest. I think it's a place, there is a space for lament, and I think it's right now. I think the Psalms are full of it. I think people who were coming to our Renew spaces, hundreds of people, were lonely and isolated, and now they're even more lonely and isolated. But yes, every church that had already set up Renew is now trying to stay in contact with those people, trying not to go back to come to me and I shall pray for you and I shall fix you, because we can't offer that sustainably. But rather than that, saying, here's a space where it's okay not to be okay, bring what you're doing, share who you are. So we're using Zoom as much as we can. We're using Facebook a bit. We're using WhatsApp a bit. It depends on the church and what they've got the capacity to do. Quite a lot of our hosts, who we call them hosts and regulars, not service users and volunteers, quite a lot of our hosts are quite vulnerable themselves with their own mental health, or quite elderly, so they're being shielded. So it's just non-ideal, but we must have maybe there's about 24 sort of virtual, we're calling them Renew Communities. We've kind of rebadged. We've gone, Renew Communities is like a virtual space where it's okay not to be okay. So you rock up at the beginning of the hour, there's a prayer. So if you don't want to stay for the prayer, you arrive a bit late into the Zoom room. You bring a hobby, you share a hobby. People are doing like Pictionary, because you can put the whiteboard up, can't you? Or just talking about what they were doing at home and bringing it together, all sorts of bits and bobs, doing the crossword together. And then at the end, another prayer, but giving people the option to leave the Zoom room if they don't want to join in. And that's going okay. It's okay. But the partnership with mental health services that we'd worked really hard in each area on getting almost disappeared. It almost disappeared overnight. And I do think mental health services in the community are really struggling to work out how to connect. And they're being told by the powers that be they can't use Zoom because it's not secure. It wouldn't be to give advice on, but that's not what we're doing. So we're trying to persuade our mental health professional friends that it would be okay for them to connect with a Zoom room if it's a community thing. And that's, I think what I'm hearing is the church is a little bit ahead of the council in being able to work. If it's a smaller group, you can work quite smart on, just let's have a go, let's just try. And the council just need to get themselves a bit more organised in a larger setting, but then they hopefully will join back in with community initiatives to combat loneliness. So we're and the prayerfulness is the main thing, always was, but it was always a bit like you get churches wanting to set up let's set up a cafe for the mentally ill people, and we'll just do a prayer. Well, now we're realising that people want to pray. They want to know how to pray. They want a bigger story than the one they lived in. And actually, I'm talking a lot more with churches that didn't have any rhythms of prayer about how to not just have prayer meetings about COVID-19, but how to make prayer the main thing that a church is about in their community, and offering that to their community to pray with them. So yeah, we've plenty to do as a charity. It's not as much fun as being face to face and with real people and seeing the whites of their eyes. Not loving the tech, but realizing that there's some opportunities to stay in connection with people who can manage it.
Brilliant. And when you started up the cafe 5 years ago, did you set out intentionally to do something missional, or were you responding to an additional need in the community?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I suppose I did. I'd done it. My only qualification for leading church was I'd done a master's in missional leadership with For Mission, they're called now, Together in Mission they were then. And it ruined me for anything other than being able to see the margins and what was going on the edges, and knowing that we were all, like, the God of mission has a church. We're not going to go, oh, what's our mission? It's all mission. So we'd done lots of silly things as a church under my leadership as well. We paid the stupid tax. So we used to meet in a pub, which sounds lovely and edgy. It wasn't, because it was leaving some people in situations of danger on a Sunday all day. And I didn't know that until the landlord had to tell me. So it's like this, I was having fun being all missional. Actually, what I was doing was trying to do the same thing we did in a church building, but trying to take it somewhere else. And what we ended up realizing was, if you start with a real person, in fact, if you start with yourself and go, what does the gospel look like for me? What does it look like to live Christianly, if you like, within my own skin, within the context of my own experience? And because I'd had experience of burnout for a year and breakdown, I'd met a lot of people who also weren't okay. And that's what I brought to the table, really, was there's a lot of people, like 1 in 4 people with a diagnosed mental illness. There's a lot of people who aren't okay and who are not seeking solace and help in the church because they're not sure whether it's okay for them to be there as they are. So in terms of mission being, what's God's heart? What is God feeling for those people? I suppose I came up with these P's, which was, prayer first, but who are the people that you see? Who are the people that God has put in your heart? Rather than what mission shall we do, just what person is it that you can see who needs the gospel, and what does that look like? And then it was, what partners are already working with those people? So let's start talking for us mental health services. Let's ask them, are you okay? What can we do? Rather than just moaning at them, which I was doing a lot because care in the community wasn't working as well as I felt it should do. And then it was, what practices would we need to do together that would look like Christian community, but that anyone could join in with? And then the practices, so inner practices for our life, our inner life, and also outer practices, what would that look like? And then what place would we do that in? Not, right, how can we use our church building, but where's the place where those things would happen best? Where would that person feel most able to do those practices? And which partners could work with us there? And then we put a plan together, which was, let's plan to try something for a few months, and let's plan to fail if necessary. And all of that was couched in prayer. So those sort of 5 Ps. And I think that was our kind of missional, experimental, framework, if you like, was we won't start with a jolly idea. We've done lots of those. Let's start with that one person for whom they don't know God loves them. They're not, and I know what they feel like because I've been there. So it's kind of had a compassionate edge to it, rather than a power dynamic that you can sometimes have, where it's like, we are bringing you the gospel. But I had, I was already a Christian when I broke myself. I knew that Jesus was the answer, and I still couldn't look after my own well-being. So I needed to learn from other people, some of whom weren't Christians, and come with some sort of humility into the situation and bring what I carried, which was, I do believe there's a God who loves us, he holds us, and prayer is a good thing to do. So
obviously, being in local church ministry myself for many years, I've always found it quite hard to get the church engaged in stuff where they don't see bums on seats as an immediate on a Sunday morning. So how would you advise ministers to kind of go on that communication journey with their church to invest in something like this?
I was really, really fortunate. I did have a delightful church to lead, New Life Baptist Church here in Nottingham. We'd never had a church building, so we weren't attached to the building as such. But I think also it was still scary for them to go, so are we preaching the gospel to people, and are they going to, and then we're going to have loads and loads of mental health issues on our church? And it was just that the only way to combat the fear was to say, look, I'm going to do it. Will you give me permission to do this? Will you give me permission to try this for 3 to 6 months? And have I got 3 people who'll do it with me? And will you pray? And then I can point at it, because it certainly isn't lack of compassion when churches don't get something. It's often fear-based, and it's sometimes lack of imagination. So make it happen and point at it. So first, actually, we did a stupid experiment, and we did what I thought would be a good Renew space with the 3 principles, but we did it in this great big community centre that looked like a prison with some bars around the top, and it wasn't it at all, not at all, but it became what I called an anti-experiment. I could point at it and go, do you see why we probably need a smaller space? You see how we probably need a cafe on the high street, because that turned into something too noisy and big, and it's not what works for that person. Back to the person again. And I think also having really key scriptures that God gives you that are that people can understand, because a lot of our guys in our churches just not sure if this is what Jesus would do. Is this if they just want to get it right, really. I don't think anyone's trying to be difficult. I genuinely think there's a lot more fear, and then this kind of wanting to be obedient to God but not sure. So for me, the woman at the well was really key. I would be asking the church, would Jesus go out of his way for one person? I know this seems a lot of work for us to do something differently for 1 or 2 people. Would Jesus do that? Oh yeah, he would. Yes, he spent that much time going through Samaria out of a 3-year ministry. So shall we try this? And for this one person, see how it works. So getting people away from church growth as the starting point and into who's the person that God has compassion for, that really helped. Also, for our church, it was selling it on the basis of the rhythms of prayer. So in the end, I said, look, if this doesn't work, we've got a place of prayer on the high street. What's the problem with that? And they all went, oh yeah, you're right. And to be honest, the fears that were there around mental health as well were mostly to do with ignorance. That sounds like I'm not being unkind there. It just meant people didn't understand what it felt like, and so they were a bit fearful of what they didn't understand. But it's because on a regular Sunday after church, you don't have time to have a conversation that's longer than 2 minutes, do you? Or you put your mask on. So to have a space in which people, the church included, could say, no, this isn't for people who are not Christians or people who are mentally ill. This is just for humans. So here's a space where you can bring what you do at home and come and do it alongside someone from the community and have a conversation that's longer than 10 minutes. And in doing so, the church learnt to be church. We learnt how to one another each other. in that space, because there wasn't the constraints of this is supposed to be a service or we're supposed to be helping people. We were literally coming and bringing what we would have been doing on our own into a shared front room and doing it together. And I think for people in the church too, it helped them to understand how to live well in their own skin, and break down that kind of mission is going to be like finding all the people who are not Christians and getting the gospel into them. It's like, no, let's live the gospel and be normal about. I mean, it's funny because the mental health professional we work with is an atheist, and she said to me, why are your people not talking about their faith in the cafe? And I said, oh, well, we decided no proselytizing in here. And she said, it's not proselytizing to talk about the difference your faith makes to your mental health. She said, why can't you just be normal? And I said, oh no, we can't be normal. We've been on courses. We know about this stuff. So it was so interesting that we got so into, are we doing evangelism or is this social action, that just to sit together and not talk about church, just who are you? What difference that makes to your headspace? What do you believe? What does it mean to believe? And you know, what difference does that make to your behaviour? And also to value the story of the other as much as you're giving your own story. That we learned by doing it. So I'll often say when I train a church, I'll show you how to set one up, but the space itself will be your teacher. A bit like that, go to your cell and your cell will teach you everything of the old monastics. You know, it's go to your renew space and your renew space will teach you to be church. So yeah, you kind of have to be prepared to learn by doing.
So having travelled now all around the country really, setting these up, working with churches in that, where are you seeing God at work?
Well, if you're asking me before COVID-19, Hayley, I was seeing God at work in the most beautiful, simple, compassionate ways of churches, little tiny churches with 6 people and massive, great big churches of 1,000, prioritizing the needs of 1 or 2, the most anxious and the most isolated person. And where they were doing that, seeing the blessing of God already, because you don't have to ask for his blessing on that, because he's already blessing that. And seeing churches prepared to do that rather than the how do we grow our church thing, that I was seeing beginning to happen. I was also seeing unity between churches in a way I've never seen it before, across denominations, across divides, because the language of mental health is worrying everybody. Everyone knows there's a bit of a tsunami. No one knows what to do. So we're not coming with any power. You know, we're not fighting over all the mentally ill people in our churches because we are them. And also the language around prayer was exciting because I was beginning to see churches really remembering that, yeah, I see loads of churches brilliant at social action. There's lots of it going on. But to remember our distinctive, that people have spiritual needs too. And, you know, mental health services will tell you that. They've got a box to tick around caring for someone's spiritual health and they don't know how to do it. So actually the church's place at the wellbeing table is to say, actually, we pray. This is how we pray. You're welcome to join in. So beginning to see the church remembering its language and its identity, seeing the church working together as one, and seeing the church prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable. Those things, and also recognize their own vulnerability, to work from their own vulnerability. Those things just attract the blessing of God without and provision, I mean miraculous provisions, without having to think about how will we afford this, what shall we do with our money. It's never been our money. So some of those little miracles of provision as well have been really exciting. And the partnership with mental health services and the local councils has surprised most churches, because they thought maybe 5 years ago there would have been a lot more suspicion around churches working with people with mental illness. But actually now there's a different, more open door, because I think there's more people and statutory services are struggling to cope with the amount of people who needing care in the community, and are much more willing now to partner with churches, if churches are willing to say, show us please, we need to learn from you as well. Not, oh, you're not doing your job properly, let's do it for you, but much more sort of humble, if you like, with we're a bit broken too. We won't do your job for you, but we will stand alongside you. We won't fill the gap, we'll point at the gap, but we'll be there with people whilst they're waiting for some medical attention, because we're not just medicalized, model of mental health stuff. We're very complex people. So I suppose for the church not to do what it can't do, but to do what it can do well. And that's like those sort of 5 ways to well-being: connecting, learning, getting active, taking notice, and giving. We've done that for centuries. It's just we've had it in a box, and it's getting the box open that's been exciting. And how much churches have loved doing it. So the hosts that are hosting Renew Spaces, there's not a problem with not finding enough people to do that, because it's about us looking after ourselves as well. So it's not volunteering to go on a rota. It is, how can we slow down, show up, and be human together? So I think we'll see it again. I hope we'll see it again. I hope coming out of the other side of this, actually the church will be asking itself those sort of questions about what they're stepping out into, and have some spaces where they can slow down and show up and be human and pray.
One of the things I love, I'm a true evangelical Baptist, and on Easter Sunday there was something in me that just didn't feel right. Although there was that strange hope of an emptiness, it still felt very weird. And I guess mission then, in a context where people are lamenting, people are asking questions, people are crying out, in one sense goes a little bit against my nature as wanting to be, Christ has done it all, just accept him.
Yeah.
So how in your experience have you kind of worked out that theology of mission in a place of vulnerability and lament?
I think you're absolutely right. Now, I had exactly the same experience. It felt like Easter Saturday all weekend. Like, I'm waiting, and I know that he has risen, and that has changed everything, and that we don't need to fear death, and that is our ultimate hope. But it still feels like, Lord, why? Why? You could blow this virus out of the air and people are dying on their own in corridors. There's something about the Psalms that gives you permission to do that. And so I suppose in terms of the theology of mission around that, that's why we've gone with that weird little "it's okay not to be okay" strapline. We didn't invent it, but it was out there already. But for me, it encapsulated what I believe the gospel to say, which is, none of us are okay. We've never been okay. It's just some of us have self-medicated with busyness and work and stuff and things and houses and sofas, and we thought we were okay. But the bottom line is, the human condition is, we're not. And the only okay, so I always take this is my thing, is take a cup, hold the cup in both hands, that your life is like that cup, empty, full, broken, whatever, and God has got you, his hands around you. And that's my kind of daily practice: hold the cup and know we are held. And the big okayness of God, his mercy, his grace, his forgiveness, his freedom, it still holds us, even if the whole world feels like it's falling apart. The bigger story is not coronavirus. The bigger story is this God who holds us, who loves us, who never lets go of us. And I think the habits of prayer and meditation and contemplation were about tapping into the bigger story that's always there, the peace of God that isn't dependent on our circumstances. Now that's the gospel. And that's why I think with lament, it is therefore okay for what's in that cup to be, Lord, I am desperate. I hate this. I thought you were kind and good. I thought you got me. And he doesn't let go of you when you say that. He doesn't stop holding you. He holds tighter. So that actually I think I said the other day, your minor notes are major praise to him, because it's because you want a relationship with him. It's because you do believe in him that it's hard. If you didn't believe there was any bigger story, this wouldn't be difficult. It's like, this happens. So knowing there is a God who loves us and holds us, and seemingly this is just out of control, there's cause for lament. And I think we're following a saviour who also wept, and he wept at a funeral where he knew he was going to raise the bloke from the dead. Why did he weep? Because death is sad. We can't make opportunities out of this. We wouldn't do it at a funeral. So I'm uncomfortable around language that says, isn't this an amazing opportunity? It's not. It's desperately sad that people are dying way before they should be, and that people who were lonely are more lonely. I don't think this is wonderful. It makes me weep. But at the same time, God has still got us. And the opportunity for the church is to say, do we really believe that? What do we believe the gospel is? Because then we won't have to work out what our next mission strategy is. We'll just have to live out of that, breathe into that a bit. So, yeah, all over the place.
And then one of the things I'm encouraging my church, so of part-time regional minister, part-time local minister, I've found it's quite easy to get quite navel-gazing at this time, and feel sorry for myself, or just focus in on myself. And I'm hearing that in my church as well. So I've encouraged my church every day to think about where they see light and where they see hope. So I was wondering, if I was to ask you that question now, where are you seeing light and hope?
Right. And that's why I love the habit of examine, because the first thing you do is you rewind your days in what have I seen the love and beauty of God. And I see light and hope all the time in the way that we've realised that there's goodness in people, the way standing out and applauding for the NHS, in the willingness of people to give their time and their energy to help one another, in the way that we realise that's not just the domain of the church, that God has placed that within each of us, that capacity to love and to be compassionate. And I think also in the beauty of nature that's got time to breathe right now, because we're not polluting it quite the same. Interesting, isn't it, that it feels like, I don't want to sound too out there, but it does feel like the planet's holding us rather than us holding it to ransom. There's something about just sitting, like the love and the beauty of just sitting with your neighbours. So we sit, 2 meters apart, but we have a coffee in the morning out the front with some neighbours, and a tea out the back over the fence with another neighbour, and the time to do that. And while sitting there to go, that's a lovely flower, what's that flower? I didn't ever notice there were flowers. I was too busy running around saving the world before to notice the world that was actually there. So that's rather lovely. And I tell you, the other thing is how much smaller the world becomes when we're all sharing the same not okayness, and in some way the sense of solidarity as humans when everything else gets stripped away. It's rather a beautiful thing. So yeah, there was a lovely documentary that a friend of mine's wife made. It was on Channel 4, and it was called A Day in the Life of Coronavirus Britain. Worth getting on catch up. And she's a Christian lady, but it's not a Christian type thing, if you know what I mean. But it held within it a day where everybody just filmed people going through one day. Beautiful thing. She made it in a weekend, showing what everyone was doing. And yeah, there was awful, sad moments, but there was this amazing, the humanity of man, the beauty of people that God loves and has made in his image, just shone out of that. It was probably the most joyous bit of telly I've ever watched. And that is happening every day, not just in Britain, but across the world, that people are working out how to help one another and how to live within their own skin well and how to appreciate nature. So yeah, all that stuff.
Okay, at the start of your ministry,
yes,
give yourself one bit of advice on what you've learned over this time. What would it be?
Ooh. That most of it didn't really matter. And that the practice of the presence of God is still all that it's about. And that's the main, and that's the one thing is still the main thing. And I think I'd have said to myself, don't peddle it, don't just preach it, practice it, go. I think I'd have said those. And actually, I knew already when I started, because God had told it to me through my time of illness when I hadn't been able to do anything. He loves you anyway. He loves you whether you do it or not. The world's still going to turn on its axis. So he couldn't love you anymore. He'll never love you any less. Be loved, and from your being loved, see what happens. I'd probably say that again to myself, because I need to hear that every day.
Yeah, that's cool. And if there are ministers, churches listening to this that thinking, actually, this sounds like a really cool way that we can engage with our community, how do they go about starting this conversation of Renew Wellbeing?
Yeah, so if you just drop on our website, www.renewwellbeing.org.uk, and all of the resources to set up a space and everything are just going to be on there. We're just piling on everything that we used to come around and bring to you and, sort of charge churches for it. I think during this season, help yourself. If it's helpful to you to start some rhythms of prayer, if it's helpful to you to try a Zoom room, if it's helpful to you and your community to start training now for when the doors open again, to have a space where it's okay not to be okay, then all the training will be on there and there's ways to connect. So yeah, please just help yourself to that. We declare every Wednesday to be Wellbeing Wednesday in our charity, which means we invite every church to join in praying for the Shalom of the nations on a Wednesday, and there's a little rhythm of prayer for that you can help yourself to as well. So and I'd love to hear from anybody who's, you know, wants any help with that. I'm here. So Ruth at renewwellbeing.org.uk, get in touch.
That's brilliant. And how can we, as an association in the South Wales, support you at this time and going forward?
Great. Well, I'm really up for partnerships. I mean, one of our 3 big principles is about partnership, and that includes partnership as a charity with associations and denominations. So I'm already partnering with a few associations to say, how can I help you as an association to get a network of kind of well-being spaces to attend to your well-being as churches together in your communities. So we'd love to, you know, I'd love for you to partner with us, because we sort of are already. I've got a few centres down in South Wales already coming on, but it's the partnership I love. It's the how shall we work together to see his kingdom come and his will done in this area of well-being. So really up for that. And also we learn, you see, from, it's a co-produced charity, so everyone who joins in brings another, you know, bit of something marvellous to the table, and what you'll bring from South Wales will be different again to what's happening when other associations are joining in. And that, you mean, you are in God's own country down there. I do absolutely love it. And the people I'm working with already down there, the minute I cross over into Wales, and I'm not just saying this because you're there, is I start singing. And at one point I was singing and I thought, I think that might be Welsh. And I think I was singing in Welsh. I don't know. Might have been gibberish. But anyway, there's something in the soil of the place where God's already always had his hand on that nation. And this could work really well for little chapels where you need to keep going. If you're the only Christians in that place, then you could just put the kettle on, do some hobbies and pray. This could work really well. And for larger churches who've got it all going on and are a bit exhausted, doing something smaller and simpler. So as an association, with the valleys and everything, you'll bring a different flavour to us about understanding the mental and emotional well-being of the nations and how God is impacting that. So looking forward to partnering with you more.
It'd be great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great chatting with Ruth. And if you've been inspired by anything she said, or if you think, actually, I want my church to get engaged or involved, or to find out a little bit more about Renew Wellbeing, then do head over to Ruth's website or do get in touch with us here at the association. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.